Okay, so welcome everybody to part 4 of World War II, and today we are getting on the road to war. So the events that lead pretty quickly to an escalation, in particular in Europe, but that'll be the focus of the conflict, at least today. And so a couple things, we'll talk about this place called the Rhineland and the annexation of Austria called the Anschluss, the Sudetenland. All these places kind of revolve around Germany. This idea of appeasement and giving in to bullies, how the Nazis and the Soviets get hitched and why they might do that. The U.S. staying neutral and trying to keep America first, and why we try to quarantine other nations, and then the eruption of the Spanish Civil War. So first thing is to understand that as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, one, Germany lost territory, parts to Poland, and they lost part to Denmark, and they had to give some to France right here. But also this shaded part right here, the Rhineland, was supposed to be what was called demilitarized, meaning that Germany couldn't have a military presence in this area because it was right next to France. So really what they would have to do is move in there, and the French would know that they were coming and they could get ready to fight. And essentially Hitler begins to ignore this agreement they had in the Treaty of Versailles, and Britain and France and other world powers don't do anything. So they march in pretty clearly and pretty boldly, and because Hitler is not stopped or checked at this point, he'll continue to push his aggression. Additionally, Germany will also break another part of the Treaty of Versailles, and that means that Germany will be joined up with Austria. So they have different histories, but they have the same kind of ethnic background. They're both Germans. They both have the same language and a lot of similar customs, and Nazism began to be pretty prominent in Austria during the same time. These same sort of ideas caught the Austrian people with a lot of enthusiasm. In particular, they wanted to join up what they saw as a rising power in Europe. So we can see a lot of people saluting Nazis as they come in, and this was a peaceful takeover. There wasn't a single shot fired. People were glad to join the German Reich, as strange as that might sound today. Additionally, this kind of success in the Rhineland and in Austria, really Hitler wanted more territory, and at the time he was claiming that he was grabbing all German people or Germanic people together. And part of that, though, some other land that they had lost in World War I as a result of the Treaty of Versailles, was part of what was Czechoslovakia. So this is the Czech part and this is the Slovakia part. But this yellow region is what's called the Sudetenland, but essentially this is areas where Germans lived in Czechoslovakia. And Hitler, in an aggressive manner, states that all German people should be in Germany and not in Czechoslovakia. And so they meet in Munich, Britain and France and Germany, to try to come up with some kind of agreement on how to deal with this crisis. And the Western powers, Britain and France that is, use what's called appeasement. But essentially they give in to this conflict in hope to avoiding a larger conflict in the future. And essentially once part of Czechoslovakia is given up, really this was the border and the defense that Czechoslovakia had against Germany, and then Germany decides they're going to give away some to Hungary and a little bit to Poland, and we're going to see that eventually all territory in Czechoslovakia will be taken by Nazi Germany. And so, once Hitler orders the occupation of the entire land, this is seen as a pretty big aggressive step, and probably the last hope that something could be worked out with the Nazis. So we see a pretty famous photo here of a Czech woman forced to salute the Nazis as they march in. But once again, not a shot fired. The country's just kind of cannibalized by Nazi Germany, and this really is the last step before conflict really begins in full. Going back though, the Prime Minister of England at the time, a guy named Neville Chamberlain, is a hero. For the moment, appeasement seemed to work, that it at least relieved this growing tension, and people thought that, all right, finally the Nazis have what they want. They got all the Germans. It's a part of Germany, and so we have peace in our time. Her Hitler is a man we can do business with. This is a reference from one of the earlier videos with the causes of World War II. But essentially, this guy says, "Look, I did it. We saved the world, and peace is back in our continent." But we'll see that is short-lived. This piece of paper will be just that in the eyes of Hitler. Additionally, things get heated up even more in 1939 to what we're seeing as pretty countries that were aggressive or at least not very friendly to each other. Germany and the Soviet Union sign a pact. Essentially, it's a non-aggression pact saying we won't attack you if war breaks out. But Hitler and Stalin were pretty natural enemies. They represented two very different ideals and types of governments. They both had kind of similar interests in area and territory. And Hitler pretty much had come out and said that he hated communism and that Russia really was going to be a land for German settlement in the future. But at least for the time, they both had something to gain. They both had something to gain from not fighting each other, and they made a secret alliance that they were going to split up Poland. They were going to both invade Poland, and so the Soviets were going to get this half, and the Germans were going to get this half. And so there's a common phrase: "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." So both of these guys are not big fans of Poland, and they get after it. So this is a famous kind of political cartoon of the time, but we can see our groom and our bride, right? And the quote down here is, "How long will the honeymoon last?" The answer is not very long, about 2 years, and then things will go south between these two countries. And while all this is going on, the United States once again reinforces its neutrality stance over several acts, clarifying and still once again saying we don't want to be a part of war. We're going to remain neutral if a war does break out, and that we're going to be isolated. And really this is because the American public and to some degree Congress, based around that public opinion, wanted to stay out of the war. So we have these war clouds in Europe. Things are not looking good, and Uncle Sam saying it's not what it used to be. But we have this ocean protecting us, so we're less inclined to be nervous about the events in Europe. And also there was a group of Americans who were pushing to stay out of war and to remain neutral. The American First Committee wanted to remain neutral the entire time, and really pushed against some actions that we'll talk about here in the future, with America leaning to the Allies' side at the breakout of the war. A famous First Committee member is Charles Lindbergh. Traveled around trying to convince people that that we should stay out of the war, right? That we should keep America first. And this sort of makes sense in the context when you're thinking about it. America's still in, to some degree, the Great Depression, so we need to focus on ourselves rather than problems abroad. But ultimately, fairly short-sighted as far as the problems that are going on. And also, some people see them as sympathizing with the Axis powers. That's less to some degree less, but still a part of it. And the quarantine speech, FDR in 1937 gives a speech basically saying that we should quarantine the aggressor nations as opposed to neutrality or non-intervention. So Roosevelt and his administration were certainly not in favor of neutrality. They just didn't have the political action to do anything about it. FDR, we'll see, will try to wiggle around these laws and this stance that Congress and the American public is going to be in. He wants to get involved simply because he sees this as a growing problem. Two quotes here that I think highlight that pretty good. I would encourage you to read these. They give kind of the flavor to the full speech. And then war breaks out. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War breaks out, and there's the National Front and the Popular Front, or the Nationalists and the Republicans. And essentially this is a group of really hardcore Catholics who want a king back on the Catholic Church, and fascists and monarchists against. So several groups, but most especially communists and Marxists, who want a very different Spain. And so we'll see, this really is a prelude to some degree of what World War II will look like. So ultimately the nationalists will be successful, and they'll be controlled by Francisco Franco. I suppose the ironic part here is he'll be the dictator of Spain way longer than any of the other dictators that we've talked about thus far. And so many, like I said, see the Spanish War as a preview of the next war, and a lot of the global powers at the time, the Soviet Union and Germany and Italy, send troops in and test out planes and tanks and strategies. So we see Italian troops marching through Madrid, although Spain will stay out of World War II as their nation is pretty much really harmed from the Civil War. This would be a nasty and brutal war. Once again, a preview of what's to come. And so, guys, hopefully by now we've at least addressed this part of our essential questions. So, America, why was it socially, economically, and politically reluctant to be involved in the war? Hopefully you can provide some examples or some events that might fill in some of those categories. And just a review, so here towards our end, the Rhineland is this area right near France, or the Rhine River area, and Germany was not supposed to have a military there, but they do it anyways. They break the Treaty of Versailles, and they break it more when they annex Austria, and then they further put some aggression out there by taking over part of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland that was filled with German people. The Western powers, Britain and France especially, appease Hitler. They give in so that to avoid another world war. And the Nazis and the Soviets will make a pact to say, we won't fight you, because both sides, peace is in their best interest because they think war is coming. U.S. will remain neutral, although FDR will not be a big fan of that policy, but he'll have to follow it because that's what public opinion desires. The American First Committee emphasizes this idea of taking care of America first and staying out of the war. Roosevelt, in his quarantine speech, says that we should quarantine these aggressive nations just like you would quarantine a sick person, keep them isolated, break trade. Every other country in the world should kind of let them know that what they're doing is not acceptable. And ultimately, the Spanish Civil War breaks out and is a highlight of what's to come. So guys, that is it. I hope you have a good one. I will see you later.